business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You are in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. Marketing strategies can be impossible to pull off when leadership teams aren't aligned on overall brand strategy. But when everyone is aligned, it can be magic. To unpack this topic, I'm joined by author and host of the Just Branding podcast, Matt Davies. Matt is a leadership advisor, consultant, and strategist helping maverick business leaders shape the future. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Jen, it's an absolute honor to be here. Thank you very much. And I love that your cat has joined us for this discussion as well.
He has. He's just wandering around. He's super excited to talk about alignment. He knows how important it is. And I am too. I'm very excited to talk about this topic because it's a huge problem when businesses or leaders within a business are not aligned. And so really excited to unpack this with you today.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Before we get into the topic, let's get some definitions sorted out. So how do you define a brand strategy and how is that different from marketing strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love to get definitions down. Before we even get into the strategy, can we first of all define brand? Because that in itself is like a strange and wild topic. Because if I was to ask the average person, like, what is a brand? Most people would respond with, the logo, or the brand identity, which of course is the expression of how it looks. But really, I think a better definition would be that a brand is the meaning that people attach to you and your offer. At least that's my definition of it, right? It's kind of like your reputation, and it exists in the hearts and the minds of your audience. And branding is the audacious attempt to manage that meaning, right? So that's what the business is trying to do. It's trying to make sure that the right people understand exactly what's on offer and ultimately will buy, right? So that's branding. It's the big attempt to manage that meaning. And of course, that can come through a logo and a brand identity and, marketing comms. But the reality is if you're really trying to, create meaning in the world, that isn't just through the messaging you're putting out. What you actually do for people and the value you actually provide, that is, key to showing up with something to say and sell. So if you're trying to manage meaning, you've got to think about it holistically. So yes, I know I'm on a marketing podcast and we'll tuck into some marketing stuff, but I think it's important to just step back and say, look, marketeers, they can only market what the business is giving them to market, to sell ultimately. And actually some people are like, hey, I want to build an amazing brand. It's like, okay, well, we need to perhaps not just think about the way that you're messaging that. We've actually got to look inside the business and inside the products and service and the offering to ensure that what we're actually putting out there, the value we're creating, the problems we're solving are, big and exciting. And that product that we're putting towards our customer base is of high value to them. If we can get that right, and the way that we deal with customers, it makes marketing's job a lot easier. So I see it as kind of a holistic approach that if we're going to build a brand, we need all parts of the organization to understand what it is that we're trying to achieve together, how, and that value we're trying to put out there. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. The brand is the meaning people attach to you. And, you asked the question, why is that a little bit different to the marketing strategy? Well, for me, you see, the brand strategy is the overarching plan that really defines, as I say, where we're going. And ultimately, it should define one thing really, really simply, in my view, a big idea, which should evolve around unique value. In other words, what is it that we're trying to put out into the market, which none of our competitors can do? What is it that we stand for that others don't? That should be at the heart of a brand strategy, in my view. And we can talk about other component parts in a minute, but at the heart, what makes you different, and where are we striving to add that unique value? That should be at the heart of your brand strategy. And if everybody in the organization understands and knows that, then that makes marketing's job easier, because a marketing strategy is, of course, the job of that is more tactical. So you've got to now go out and communicate what is on offer to the audience through the channels and the resources and so on that the business has at its disposal to generate leads. So I say brand strategy is a lot more holistic and long term, whereas marketing strategy perhaps is a little bit more shorter term and tactical.
Mm-hmm. And you know what else I'm hearing from you too? Like, I think oftentimes businesses are looking to marketing to define the brand strategy. But actually, what I'm hearing from you is that brand should be driving the marketing strategy, as well as product and experience and everything else, because it is a lot broader than just sitting within one department.
Yeah, absolutely. People look to marketing to solve all the problems, which is great. But the reality is that marketing, if you think about it like this, like I see brand starts inside out, and usually it starts at the leadership level, right? But everybody inside the organization should understand what the brand's about, because their micro and their macro decisions will influence ultimately the meaning that people attach to the business, to the organization, to the brand. So you're absolutely right. Like, why do we just look to marketing to solve all the issues, when actually maybe that's the scapegoat of the situation? Maybe we need to look at, are our leadership team, and this is what we're going to unpack today, are we aligned on precisely the unique value that we're trying to offer the market? Are we aligned on a high level strategic plan and big idea that we know is going to make us unique and famous? And if we can do that across, as you say, product, operations, HR, or people, as we now like to call them, the people team, if we've got all of those leaders agreed that yes, this is the direction that we're going to go in, then marketing become part of that rather than the only solution to any particular business growth challenge.
Sure. That sounds easy, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of the reasons that you've seen why leadership teams are not aligned on brand strategy?
Right. Well, this is a huge question. I think it depends on the size of the company and their growth stage. But what I tend to see is early stage, okay, where, I don't know, you're just getting seed money and getting started, startup stage. Those leadership teams, they're small and they're pretty much aligned, and the founder is usually involved and very passionate and understands precisely what they're trying to create in the world, the problem they're solving, what's broken, and what they're doing now to resolve that. But as a business sort of grows and time goes on, what happens is it gets bigger and bigger, and then new people obviously come into the leadership team and things shuffle around. And I know it's always a very daunting thing for CEOs that I've spoken to when they pass someone in a corridor and they don't know their name anymore. And suddenly it's a different game, because now the idea previously that they were so passionate about that they could easily talk to a small team about and make sure everybody was aligned on, suddenly is not as simple as that, because now we've got teams in different places, with hybrid working now, everyone's all over the place, and there's personal connection with the founder and the drive starts to go. And so then even as time goes on and businesses get even bigger, perhaps they have different satellite offices and so on, this problem becomes worse and worse. And what I find, and this is perhaps just my observation, is that people that eventually in bigger organizations, say they've been going 20, 30 years, what tends to happen is you get promoted to the C-suite, but you get promoted because you've got, real great skills, let's say, in operations. Okay. And so that's your drive. So when you go to board meetings or senior C-suite meetings, you're there to champion your piece of the business and fight for that, right? Fight for resource, fight for whatever it might be. And everybody else at that top table is often there to fight for their part of the organization. And the CEO often is kind of in the middle of all that, thinking like, oh my goodness, like I'm just trying to herd a whole load of lions, right, together, and they're all kind of scrapping. And what tends to happen is that, yeah, people look at their part of the business and they really pull in that direction, but that's not necessarily the best way. I mean, my approach is to come in with use brand strategy as a Trojan horse to get them all to stop thinking about their part of the business and seeing things internally from their perspective, and to start thinking, okay, well, what is the meaning we want other people to attach to us? Where are we going in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Who are we serving? So just real quick, I've got 4 big brand strategy questions I like to sort of challenge leadership teams with. And they are, why do we exist beyond making money? So, what's our purpose, vision, mission as a brand? Who is it that we exist to serve? Who's our tribe? Who are our people? What problems and challenges have they got? Do we understand them? The next question is how should we show up for them? So that is, everything from how we look to how we sound to the experiences we create, how we make people feel. Are we all aligned on what that should be? And finally, the big question right at the end is, what is our unique offer? Like if our audience could only get something from us that they couldn't get from anywhere else, that is going to give us an extreme competitive advantage to kind of outmaneuver everybody else in the market. Do we know what that is? Are we striving for something in the market that no one else is doing? Because if we're not, then we're just going to become mediocre. We're going to sit in, we're going to become ordinary. We're going to start competing with everybody on price and so on. So we need to be aligned around what that dream is, what that vision is as a leadership team. And if we're not, we're going to kind of have different priorities and we're all going to kind of, resist everybody else's kind of ideas. So we're going to struggle.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a lot that you just shared with me that I want to dig deeper into. This is great stuff. I think, what you were talking about, being focused on operations, you're in the C-suite and you're really focused on your own area. It reminded me when I was younger in my career, I was asking for advice for someone. I was a VP and I wanted to be a CMO. And I'm like, what's the difference? What is the difference between a VP of marketing and a CMO? And the person told me the CMO thinks about the other areas of the business, the entire strategy. And I think that's true with what you're saying, right? Any division, if you are the leader of that part of the organization, you have to be thinking about how your peers, your partners are impacted by what work you're doing or the overall strategy, or maybe your division isn't the priority at the moment, and maybe enjoy that for a little bit because you'll have your moment. But that just really resonated with me when you were saying that, because and I just don't think people call that brand strategy, and I think it's so interesting to hear how you're describing it. And those 4 big questions I think are great ones I'm hearing you and I'm asking myself these 4 big questions, right? For my own business, for my clients' businesses. And I think, this concept of a unique offer is where I see a lot of people struggle and get hung up and say, well, we offer the same thing. We have competitors, right? Like our technology is very similar. What makes us unique is this one feature or this one thing you can do in the platform. And that's not it at all.
So that's product level, right? And what I'm talking about is brand level, right?
Sure.
So what could one thing, if you are struggling with that, I'm not talking about you particularly, Jen, but if someone's listening in and they are struggling with that, is to think through the concept of where you might be different, or where the opportunity lies to add value in a different way. Because you might, let's say you sell, I don't know, I'm going to use a silly example. Let's say you sell toilet rolls, right? Like, you say, well, I'm in the toilet roll industry, right? Like I sell toilet rolls. Like, how can I be different? Okay. But, if you ask the question, well, how might we carve out unique value in this space? Now you're asking a very interesting question, right? And it might not be in what you produce. It might be in how you service your customers. It might be in your delivery. It might be in a number of things. But everybody in the organization should know we are striving to be different in this area. And what I see is a lot of people, they fall into what I call the brand trap, right? And what the brand trap is that you kind of, as an organization, as I say, usually this is older organizations, 30, 40 years on, you're in a marketplace, you're doing well, you're selling stuff. But the trap is that you tend to start looking at, well, who's number one in our space, right? What are they doing? What do they look like? What do they sound like? What are their sort of service level agreements like? And you copy, right? And you see this just on a veneer level in terms of I do a lot of sort of, audits, and you just look at competitor sets and they all look and sound the same. And the reason for that is, as human beings, we feel like that's safe. Like, we are all in it together. We're just gonna, and they're number one, and it must have worked for them. So if we copy that, then maybe we'll be number one day. No, it doesn't work like that at all. In fact, it might feel safe, but that's the worst thing you can do. And the reason it's the worst thing you can do is because from a customer's perspective, the customer's looking at the offerings or the category, and they can't distinguish anybody providing something really special for them. And so what they will do is they will start to assess on price, which we see all the time, the commoditization. And then you're in a price war to the bottom. Whereas what I think you need to do is to break out of that, is to think, well, how can we offer something really unusual, really different, that's going to be of high value, not for everybody, but for a particular type of target audience. We can then design and orientate the whole business around that. And that's how we will win, because we'll outmaneuver the competition. It'll allow us to charge more because we'll be of more value, and nobody will be able to get what we're offering from anywhere else apart from us. So I think that's the dream of a good brand strategy. It is a different way of looking at things, I guess, from perhaps, a traditional way of kind of looking at things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's bigger than, like you said, the logo and the brand identity, right? It is the way that you make people feel. And I heard Danny Meyer, who's the founder of Shake Shack and also has some very high-end restaurants in New York and elsewhere, speak a few years ago. And he was talking about launching a new burger chain. And how could you differentiate on, the product has to be good. That's the baseline. Of course, it has to be a good product. But he said, and I'll never forget it, he said, what if the food is free and you're paying for the way the experience makes you feel? And that to me is that's exactly what we're talking about here. You're not trying to be the cheapest, same thing competing with a very saturated market. You're trying to carve out a new space where there's a feeling you're creating. It's customer experience is the brand for that particular company. And for another company, it might be something different, but figuring out where you can carve out that space is the key.
Yeah, I see a lot of people have a strategy which is I don't know, we want to just be a little bit better than the other people.
Right.
But frankly, everybody's saying that. And as you say, we've got to be careful where we set the bar. Because frankly, I see a lot of leadership teams, they set the bar quite, as a standard. It's we're going to be green, we're going to be sustainable. It's well, everybody in the industry is going to do that. That isn't something that a consumer is going to be whoa, I've got to go to your brand. I've got to buy this thing. If you look at all of the, what I call sort of standout brands, they're based around one simple, powerful idea that you can only get that thing from that brand. So if you think about Tesla, for example, their strategy was, we're not going to create cheaper cars. We're going to charge more, but we're going to really kind of lead the way in revolutionary innovation, and we're going to orientate our business towards that. When you go to Tesla, it's kind of completely unique. The car, the product, the experience. In fact, do you know what? We're not even going to market ourselves. We're not going to even do advertising. We're going to be so focused on creating that unique value. And look what, they're a phenomenal business. So sure. You've got to think about things in my view, in a different way. And what brand does, if you think about it from a brand perspective, the best thing about it is it makes it about the meaning that other people are attaching to you. It makes it about the customer, not yourself. Mm-hmm. You see, and that's the big problem. A lot of people, they're thinking about their business, their department, where their careers, if you like. And the problem with that is it can get very short-term sighted. Whereas if you think about the value you're going to offer somebody else and the meaning that they want to have, you want them to have of you, and then you're going to try and show up and prove yourself to them, then you're in a far more stronger position if you can rally everybody around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about misalignment and what impact that can have on the business when the leadership team is moving in different directions.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because really alignment, I think, is the secret to any business success. Frankly, it really is, because you can't, a single founder can start things up, but they need everybody around them to be pulling in the same direction to make things happen. So if you find yourselves a little bit further down the line and you're looking back at your leadership team and they're all scrapping and pulling in different directions, you're probably going to see, a lack of clarity, a lot of confusion in the business, a lot of waste in terms of energy, resource, people starting projects which don't align, then getting upset when they're canned, and all sorts of things. You're probably starting to see a little bit of, I guess, exhaustion, because people are frustrated that they don't understand, where everything's going, so they can't easily contribute towards it, and so you get a lot of kind of suffocation, if you like, of great thinking. And so when we're aligned, though, what that allows us to do is to kind of make sure everybody's clear and consistent as a leadership team on the message, where we're going, on the objectives and the tracking, to get there. So, you can set clearer plans. You can then kind of make sure that you allocate your resources effectively. And you can make sure that you kind of then eventually you'll know you're on track when customers start saying back to you some of the strategic things that you would like them to. So your brand strategy is working when they're saying it, not when you're saying it. When you hear it from the feedback forms and the customers, that's when you know that your team are aligned, and everybody from product through to customer success, through the marketing and the business development, when everything's pulling in that direction, that's when you'll start to hear customers say, wow, that was incredible. I'd never seen that from anywhere else. Thank you so much for changing my life. That's what you want. So alignment is absolutely crucial. If you don't have that alignment in your leadership team, you are going to kind of lack that energy, I would say, to pull everybody forwards in that direction.
Yeah, for sure. I could see exactly when you said waste, that really hit me, right? Because you've got so many people, or maybe not number of people, but you've got people doing so much work that is, everybody's running in different directions, and it's a waste of energy, a waste of resources. And there's probably a lot of good stuff that could be happening if you were just maybe walking in the same direction, versus kind of banging your head against the wall all over the place. And that does create a lot of frustration. And I think there's also the risk of sort of, that finger pointing that starts to happen. I mean, even as you were mentioning, people turn to marketing to fix all the problems. Well, when there's misalignment, absolutely, hey, our product is not, we're not getting the adoption, must be a marketing problem, right? But maybe it's an alignment problem.
Yeah, precisely. I think you're right. I think you also have to think about, I'm a long-term thinker, right? So it's like, let's say we're misaligned and we're starting, we start a new initiative on this side of the business and we really push it, and then it fails because this side of the business wasn't really on board with it. Then, if you really try to strive in that side of the business, what's going to happen is after a while, you're going to think, you know what, I'm not going to bother anymore. I'm not going to come up with new ideas because I tried so hard. I worked really hard. And frankly, the product team just didn't get it. They didn't understand it. And I can't, life's too short. I'm either going to leave or I'm just going to sit there and think, I'm just going to chug along. And that's fine if you want a load of people chugging along. But if you want new ideas, if you want to, really, grow the business, you're going to need to find a way to inspire everybody, I think, as a leader. And being aligned at the senior level around that vision is what gets you there. It's what kind of, it gives people permission to move in that direction. So yeah, really, really, really important. And as I say, brand is kind of brand is like the Trojan horse to get you there, right? It kind of, it gives you that narrative as a leader, but it has to be true and authentic. I'm not just talking about making stuff up. I'm talking about actually, we know our customer is this type of customer. We know their pains and problems, and we know that we can do something for them that nobody else can do. And that's what we're striving for in this year and next year, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. You bring up another interesting point about the sort of long-term thinking and that long-term vision. How do you what recommendations do you have when the sort of short-term goals start to get in the way of the long-term vision? I've seen that happen before in organizations where it's like, yeah, totally. That's totally what we're trying to do for 5 years. But right now we really have to hit our numbers this quarter. And that's in conflict with our long-term vision. How do you rectify that challenge?
Yeah, that is always a very difficult one. I think what we're looking at there is that this is where alignment comes in, right? Because if you've got a long-term brand vision to, I don't know, let's say you want to be, let's just take a random example. I don't know. If you think about Teslas, just because we mentioned them, so they want to accelerate the world's transformation to green energy, or whatever their statement is. So that's like a huge long-term goal, and therefore they can align around that. So everything they're doing as a business, is it aligned to accelerating that? And it's about their customer, right? It's not about them. So if they are, they know the money's going to flow, the numbers are going to flow. And my kind of challenge to leadership teams often when I hear the short term is because perhaps they've got investors and so on, and they're trying to kind of make sure that they're hitting those numbers to make sure it works. Well, are they sure, if they're struggling with the numbers, are they sure that brand strategy, that overarching vision is working? Are we sure we're adding the value that we should be adding to the marketplace? Because if those numbers are struggling and we're having to sort of massage them and focus on them, the short term rather than the long term, well, are we sure our long term is correct? Because clearly whatever we're doing now there's a problem. We're not as competitive as we should be. So we do need to then think about the future. So you asked for practical advice. There's a business author, you've probably heard of him, called Peter Drucker. Pretty old now. He wrote a lot of work in the 60s, I think. And I'm going to paraphrase him a little bit, but he says words along the effect of you can't focus on now and the future, because the fires of today, right, they're always going to kind of eclipse the vision of tomorrow. Okay, so in other words, you need to separate people focused on the future from people focused on the now. And I see this as a massive problem. Like, I'm a big champion of businesses that put somebody in the C-suite that's focused on the brand, the long term, because everybody is going to be focused on the fires of today. Like, there's an ops problem, or there's a product problem, or a factory problem, or whatever it might be. But who's thinking and challenging and saying, look, if we make that decision, that's going to affect our long-term, the perception of us long-term in the market. That isn't going to further us towards, the green transition or something. So you need to have somebody in the team focused on the future. That's all they do. They're thinking about the future, and then thinking about the value that you're going to create in the future. And ideally, you'd have a little team around them as well, if you can, like an innovation team who are really looking at how we're creating unique value in the future. And then you've got the other people who are kind of focused on delivering the day to day. And I think you've got to have both. But the key is you've got to have a plan that everybody understands for the future, because if you don't have that, then the short term is definitely going to be the thing that everybody focuses on.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That can be a big challenge, but it's interesting to say, like, just have that person that is fully, like, kind of bringing people back. Hey, just a friendly reminder, this is where we're trying to get to, because it's easy to get stuck, when things come up and they feel really urgent and they feel important in the moment. And actually, they might be in conflict with long-term strategy. If you're on a team, regardless of your role, I guess, and you feel that misalignment, what are some of the things that anyone can do to try to bring your leadership team back together?
Okay, so that's a super question as well. So I would always say, okay, you've got to create the space to think about the future, like we've been saying. You've got to create a day, an offsite, whatever it might be, and you've got to pull that team together to think slightly differently about the business. And usually, I'm going to say this because this is what I get hired to do, so I hope you don't mind. I'm not selling myself, but I'm saying usually you would get an external person in. And the reason you'd get an external facilitator, consultant, advisor in is because they have no politics, ego, interest, vested in a particular section of the business. And I think that's very healthy. So you need to get someone who's senior, who can challenge, who can, create excitement and energy and run the leadership team through their paces, but kind of get them to think differently about what they're doing. And most importantly, get them to begin to align. So my view is, I'm a massive fan of like a vision workshop, right? Where we basically make sure that perhaps you do some research before, you'd speak to customers, you'd even speak to review competitors, you perhaps might even speak to the individuals in the leadership team, and maybe even do a staff survey, right? So you bring all that information to the table, and then you workshop around, what does the future look like? Here's our current context. How do we move the dial? What are our main challenges? What is that future value that we're going to create? And so for me, it's all about workshops. It's all about collaborating at pace. And it's all about creating a really positive space for that thinking to happen. And it's so rare, I find, that businesses invest in that, which is because of what you were saying, like the day-to-day, the fires, it feels really important. We've got to hit our numbers. But if you don't know, your job as a leader is frankly to lead someone to a place they're not at right now. And if you're just staying where you are, just kind of maintaining the status quo, that's not leadership, that's management, right? You're a leader, you've got to push forward, and you've got to do that together in a unified way and make sure you're all on the same page. So I would say get everybody together. The other thing I would say is you've got to get leaders to see their peers as people, right? Not as adversaries. So sometimes, a lot of the work I do, like workshops sometimes over a few days, and in the evenings, maybe, we'd go out for dinner or something like that. And you often find the best bits of work are done, not in the kind of the workshopping space, although I do get good results from that as well, but it's more like over dinner, we were talking about that this morning, Jenny, and oh yeah, Larry, that was really interesting. I never thought about it from your perspective. Have you thought about this? And it's those kind of more personal touches, which I kind of feel are started to, perhaps after the COVID pandemic, we kind of got into this digital space, but it's very easy to have a veneer and a kind of a front, when really you got to get people to connect as people, but around a common goal, a common focus. So there's some thoughts for you to consider.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're exactly right about, I think those personal relationships really make a big difference in the business. Years ago, I read something about, how to bring marketing and sales together. Like marketing and sales alignment is always the big challenge ever. And it said, as a marketer, the most important thing you need to know about your sales leader is how they take their coffee. And I thought that was brilliant, just it's not about understanding the shared goals. Yeah, you're going to get there, but you need to have a personal, some sort of personal relationship that allows you to kind of be more open and collaborative. And I think that's really important. But also, I think what you were saying about, these workshops, I think it's so good to kind of take a step back and have a couple of days to really think about, think more broadly about the business versus getting stuck in the day-to-day. And I will vouch for getting an external advisor in there. It's so valuable to do something like that. But I'm curious about, I was going to ask about data and sort of how that plays a role. And you talked about speaking to customers ahead of time, doing some competitive research before you walk into that room, maybe doing some employee surveys. What role does data play in creating that alignment and kind of bringing to the table that evidence that maybe something's working or something's not and things like that?
Well, data brings a level of objectivity, doesn't it, to decision making, and it can help to cut through personal opinion a little bit, right? I use a lot of customer insights. I'm a big fan of good old fashioned, right, talking to customers, right? How many leadership teams actually, I'm talking about C-suite people, how many of them actually make an effort every year or every quarter to actually go and speak to a customer, like a real customer, and just to ask them questions like, hey, how are you finding our services? Why did you buy from us? Who else were you considering? And if you haven't done it, why don't you, hire someone like me, a consultant or someone, to do some of that research for you? Because, you can have tons of data, but sometimes it's in those little, those conversations, you can find out a lot of rich strategic information as to how you're doing and the perception of your audience towards you. So data is very important. And I like to use quantitative and qualitative information to challenge leadership teams really to move forward. I think you're right. Customer insights, market research, competitor research, all, super helpful to kind of reveal opportunities and gaps in that competitive landscape. And also, as I say, that sometimes the best people, right, to listen to are your employees, right? So have you created a space for your employees to kind of give their thoughts on the future? So a lot of my clients, I advise that every year we should do a survey, okay, 10-question survey. And all we're doing is saying, what opportunities do you see for us to grow in the future? And then have we got a space for the leadership team to actually take that information, review it, and think, actually, there's some interesting ideas there that we could potentially explore or kick off some new initiatives around. So if you're not doing that, then I think you're missing a trick, because your people, and I find particularly salespeople, they have a nose for that stuff, because they're out there on the front line talking, selling on the phones or whatever they might be doing, and their insights are invaluable for new ideas, and to make sure that you show up with value, and ideally unique value in the market. So data is very important, but I will say this one thing: the problem with data is that it's kind of rear view. It's stuff that's already happened that we've logged. And what I think leaders need to do is they need to think long view. So yes, be aware of that, but also sometimes you do have to figure out where those gaps are. And sometimes that takes a bit of bravery, right? Because data can't tell you where new opportunities lie. Sometimes you've got to try some new stuff. It's like there's that famous quote from Henry Ford, wasn't there? Like, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's kind of like, we listen to the people, but then, we should also, as leaders, have a view on perhaps the future, and stepping and leading people bravely into that future as we go forward.
Sure. Yeah. And I think too, there is a risk of getting too bogged down in data, or maybe having not being able to make decisions without sufficient data. Like, there's risk in that too, but having that bit of evidence. I love what you said, that, data brings that objectivity to decision making, which is so important. You can't argue. This is what's happening. Here's what we're seeing. This thing that we thought was going to work isn't working. So, maybe we need to shift, or whatever the case may be. But even if it's not data, talking to customers, like you said, or if you're struggling to talk to customers, your salespeople being your next best thing, and kind of understanding what problems are our audience trying to solve that we're not solving for them, or they're not seeing in the market. Because that's that Henry Ford example. Maybe you don't ask people what they want. Maybe you ask them what they're doing, where they're struggling, where they're getting hung up, and understanding their challenges versus understanding their wants can help you to spark those ideas and be creative. And I love what you said, be brave. Oh my God, that's so hard as a business leader to be brave, because we don't want to be brave. We want to be safe. We want to hit our goals in a reliable, repeatable, and scalable way. But it requires bravery.
But that goes back to my point at the start, right? Sometimes you feel safe, right? Because it's like, we're the same as everybody else. We're just doing a tiny little bit better. But as I say, I actually say that it's probably, if safety is what you want, you might actually need to be bold and really kind of strike out to try and do something, because funnily enough, at least then you can create real value for a particular customer set. Of course, you need to be 100% committed to that and be confident in what you're about to do. But if you don't, if you find yourself being commoditized, the most unsafe thing to do is to stay exactly the same, right? And to look the same as everybody and to do exactly the same. That is literally suicide, business suicide. Where you want to go is say, if that's happening to you, okay, acknowledge the facts through the data. We're losing market share. Everybody's undercutting us on price. It's time for us to really innovate and to try something new. So I would say, don't get too bogged down in the data, but be aware of it, right? And one of the things data is very good at is kind of tracking perception and how you're doing. And the classic one for a brand is like the net promoter score. You ask every customer at that point in the customer journey, how likely are you to recommend us out of 10 to somebody else? And as months go on, you can just you can start to sort of see how the brand is performing. But as I say, that doesn't give you a step change. That doesn't give you insight into where to next. It just gives you an understanding of your current performance with your current offering. So you've got to be aware of when to use the data and where it's useful and where it isn't.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I have, you've shifted my perspective a little bit on brand, and, because again, I think we said this at the beginning, I think it's more common that we're thinking about brand in terms of colors and logo and maybe some values or stuff like that. But really, like, that is coming from marketing, sitting within marketing, and sort of it's the role of marketing to come up with and promote the brand. But what you've described as, brand being the strategy, that is the overarching strategy that aligns all of the different departments around customer. It's a great way to think about it, and I think super important to make that shift and to look a little bit more long term. So, anyways, thank you for all of your wisdom today.
About that, but it's absolute pleasure, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, we need to get through the veneer into the heart of things, and I think you can use brand to basically become the operating model, or at least the principles of the operating model for the whole business. And if you're not, you're missing a trick. People are going to get too focused on the short term, and that long-term value, as I say, that unique value, which you really need to be focused on, is what you're going to miss out on. So manage your meaning, folks. That's my message.
Love it. I love it. Well, thanks for everybody for tuning in. We covered a lot today. You can connect with Matt on LinkedIn to learn more about his work and subscribe for free strategy tools and tips via his website, mrmattdavies.me. Visit growgetter.io for more insights on B2B marketing strategy. And don't forget to subscribe to Marketing Demystified wherever you get your podcasts. I'll be back